Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining again. I saw that some of you were hard at work filling out the essential questions, and I just wanted to acknowledge, I haven't met you, John Humphrey. If you could sort of tell me who you are. I'm Julia Burgos.
Hi, I'm a teacher at TC on King Street campus in the International Academy. Also have a daughter who is a junior there, and a daughter who graduated last year, who's now, well, I guess a year and a half ago now, rising sophomore in college. But before, I'm a career switcher. I was an attorney and did a lot of campaign and policy work prior to starting teaching about 4 years ago.
Well, thank you. Nice to meet you, and welcome to the team. Glad you were able to join us.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start out this morning by doing a little bit of a check-in. I have some things swimming around in my head about this after looking at the central questions and where I'm sort of getting a little stuck as the key decisions. And so I wanted to sort of do a check-in with you, and we could just take a few minutes to see where you're at. What are you thinking about? Any concerns that you have about the process so far? And just anything you want to share at this point.
I do. I want to share. You know, one of the essential questions that I don't think is covered in these essential questions is just I guess a question about timing for our group in terms of our reaction to decisions that are made or our outreach to decisions that are made. Any of those type of just questions for our stakeholders, because we're the ones that are sponging up the information and then disseminating it out in different ways. And so one of the questions, I guess, for me and Julie, I know we've talked about this a little bit, is what's the question we need to ask the other groups about timing and just in making sure that we have that information in time to disseminate it in a thoughtful way without a last second rush to the end, where we know what happens when that happens is we miss a significant amount of families because they need a little bit of extra time, methods, videos, you know, all those things that take a little bit of time to put together with a team that we all know on this call, a team that is already doing multiple things throughout the day. So that was just my overall question is, how do we put that as a real essential need for us?
Great, and I think that we can add any essential questions that we feel are essential questions for us. So I would go ahead and add that. I think that is definitely something that I'm concerned about, and spoke with Sima about this morning, and I told her I was going to do a check-in with you guys because I have some concerns, but I don't want to taint the group with my concerns. I want to hear from you first, and then I'll share with you what I'm thinking and what we may want to focus on. But Helen?
Yeah, so I think I am concerned about the clarity of the process between now and the final plan. I mean, that's where I sit here going, if they had step-throughs and we knew we had deadlines already and we knew what we were working to, with those kind of bite-sized pieces of information that we know we have points of communication, I think I'd be happier to know what those are. We can work to anything, but I just need to know what those are, know what we're working to. I think with the clarity around that is where I'm kind of feeling a little like
Great. So I just realized I didn't ask about a note taker for this call. Tanika was gracious enough to do it last time. Do I have any volunteers this time? Because I just realized we're not capturing some of this information. Anybody want to chip in and do some note taking for overarching messages for this call?
I can do it, but I don't think I can share my screen and do it because I'm kind of running.
And I did want to say that Kurt is going to be co-facilitating these meetings with me because everybody else has sort of gotten a co-facilitator at this point, just to help with the screen sharing and so on and so forth. So I can focus on the conversation. So he's going to be doing that. So he can't do that and time keep and note take at the same time. So who can I get to volunteer for that?
I'll do it today.
Thank you, Shauna. Okay, so I see that Priyanne, you had your hands up, and then John, I'll come to you next.
I think I'm sorry guys, I had a little sinus infection. Mornings are the worst, nights are the worst. But anyway, I can't keep my mouth shut. I never can. I feel like, as everyone else, that timing is important and that we're going to have a difficult job. And when it hits the fan, we're going to be like rushing to figure out what to do. So I kind of was trying to think, what is our job? What can we do? And the only thing I can think of is that we can just create the systems of communication that we think will be effective. And then we're going to have to end up like blazing and putting stuff into those systems when decisions get made. And I don't know, like, if we can like draft what we think would be happen and then be in a position of changing things instead of starting things. But I am concerned about the fact that I think our role is crucial in the end. I mean, I think it's really crucial in the end. And I don't know how, without a lot of information from the other teams, we're going to stay on top of that.
John?
Speaking as an old, and I mean old school administrator, the communication part, once we know what the plan is, I have no fear that we can't do that. The problem in my mind is doing what needs to be done once a decision is made. As I said last time, it took me all summer at TC to create a master schedule. Creating what are we going to do in 2 weeks in all these various facets, if we do not have a plan in place until mid-August, it's no matter what we communicate, it's going to be difficult for those on the ground to be able to do all that needs to be done to implement that. So I'll just keep preaching that same tone as we go through this, because I am concerned about the time that the practitioners, those that need to implement need to have to do it.
Thanks, John. And Tanika, I see you have your hands up, and then we'll go to Krishna.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that has been stated so far. One of the things that I've been thinking about is how do we, as we're developing these systems for communication, when all the plans are together, how do we center all of our efforts around reaching our most difficult to reach parents? Because I think if we focus our efforts there, it'll get to the masses per se, but how do we maintain that and make sure that that's our focus?
Thank you. Krishna?
So I echo everybody's statements. One thing that I just want to sort of center us is that communication is super important, but that family engagement and relationship that we have built we can make it or break it in a moment like this. I mean, we're seeing right now with the summer learning how many phone calls we're getting this week, 50, 60 in couple hours, and families, saying, I didn't get this or I didn't get that. And it's really hard to build relationships and trust when the information, right, they feel that it was not given to them. So learning from those lessons and going from there, how do we put processes in place? We used to just roll with the punches, but can we do something to plan? Like Tanika said, those who are hardest to engage and reach out, how do we do that? Let's plan from now, because we know that the ones that want the information, they will go in the website, they will read the ACPS Express, but our EL families, many of them don't go to those places to find information.
So I agree. So John, you have something to share?
Yeah, I concur with what you all said. I mean, teaching this spring, even though we tend to have pretty strong relationships with families in the International Academy, communication was a struggle. And I think that it was, I mean, just basic communication was a struggle. So many, all the normal, we left school with, for example, having virtually no contact with, because of the way that we left so abruptly, we had no contact with, no contact with students. We had everything in Power School was cell phone numbers for parents who were still working or trying to work. And there were all the normal channels of communication were disrupted. And so part of what we've got to do is, I think, rely on there are places where we've got really good relationships. And then I think places where some of those relationships and those systems have broken down. And so we've got to do some repair work too. And it will take weeks to do that. And if we don't, and so one of the things I think that we've got to think about doing is thinking about, before we know what the message is, figuring out where the breakages are in the systems, and begin to sort of try to figure out how to communicate now, and figure out what are the channels we've got, how many kids have we got doing summer school, particularly the high school students. I know it's different with families with younger kids, but trying to figure out what are the informal channels of communication we've got, as well as the formal channels of communication, because it's going to take, I think it's going to take that. I think the other thing that occurred to me is making sure that from the perspective of the families that we're in contact with, that we are communicating back what the questions are, back to the rest of the teams, because I'm not certain always that and I think this is one of the struggles with summer school, the communication it's happening so rapidly, and from the central office, you're working so hard to sort of do the administrative piece and to get it all out there, and you're just driving and driving and driving, and there's no space to try to to be able to put yourself on the receiving end, and to try to say, how's that being received, and are we answering all the questions? You're doing everything you can just to get information out. And I think one of the things we'll have to be mindful of is, what are the questions that families have? And they might be really super simple logistical questions, or they might be, more complicated, questions about, what is happening, but they may be really, really different, and they may not be fully anticipated by the folks who are doing the planning. And we've got to help them know what those questions are so we can get them answered.
Thank you, John. So I see Shanna, you have your hands up, and then Delana has added some of her comments in the chat. So I don't know if you want to take a look at those. I don't know if you want to share anything specifically, Delana, out loud, but I see your comments. But Shanna, and I want to welcome Melinda. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, real quick. This is in addition to what Mr. Porter was saying about scheduling, with the summer school program. I think we have to think about communication beyond just opening, but around the schedule. I'm a parent. I have a daughter who's a rising ninth grader. Of the few summer classes that she had Algebra 1 on her panel, which she took in 7th grade. She's a rising ninth grader. She shouldn't be in Algebra 1. We paid for 9th grade PE. She didn't have that. So I know the system. I knew who to contact, right? They're my colleagues. I could make the adjustments. But even once we get the parents the information around getting back to school, they have no clue if those classes are correct. So I think, to John's point around scheduling and the mess of continuous communication that's going to happen with getting this straight if we're virtual, I think we need to know that this is beyond just opening school.
Thank you, Shanna. So Delana, are you good with what you've already shared in the chat?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'm just saying yes to everything.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just so I have such a reaction to the way that summer school was rolled out, because doesn't seem like there was any collaboration on the customer service portion of this. And I'm just talking about the families who speak English, because that's what I see on social media. I can't even fathom what the parents who do not speak English have been dealing with, let alone, I mean, Shanna is, a parent and was, multiple marks against the summer school program in failing an employee of ACPS. So these are the things where, like John was saying, we have to think to the individual and how the individual pieces, how the individual pieces will be seen by individual people. A letter that goes out and then a letter that goes out after it. And it's like, we're just told, hey, just put this stuff out. Well, there's no collaboration about what this piece over what this piece work together to inform the person on the other end what the instructions are. And then also the follow through with the customer service. Like for summer school is the perfect example, again, because on Monday morning, there should have been all hands on deck to provide help desk and summer school customer service for all the parents who are completely confused, completely like, where's this, where's that? And basically we're pointing it all to like two people, Alicia Kincaid and maybe a few other people. And it's like, there should have been a group of people who are all collaborating together to triage. I think there has to be some triage, because there has to be some setup for customer service and triage, because parents are going to be overwhelmed and confused. And if they don't have some place where they know they can get answers, it's going to be terrible.
So I think that's a great, we talked about, we have to make some decisions today. I think that's a great suggestion, that in the first days of summer school, that we have a phone bank set up for people to call and answer any questions that they have or any concerns, because, we're not going to, we may or may not have physical schools open. And even if they are, they're going to be inundated with trying to get people to class and who's going to go where. So I think that's a great thing that we can talk about it as a decision point. I'm glad that we had a chance to check in this morning, because I haven't even been working with you guys for months, and I felt the same exact way. I just felt really overwhelmed by what it was that we needed to make as decisions, because communications is so centered around other people's decisions, right? And so, and the concern about when are they going to finish those decisions so we can have our stuff ready. And so that's what Kurt and I were talking about that yesterday. We had a one-on-one, and I said to him, is it just me? I'm struggling with this whole key decisions thing, because I'm like, everything is predicated on everybody else's decisions. So I have some suggestions about what we can do. Some of you have already kind of voiced those suggestions. And so from my standpoint, I think what I would love to see is for us to focus on the timelines, right? Like everybody said, time, right? I heard that over. That's exactly where I was with that, is when do we need you to make a decision about X so we can communicate it? When do we need you as a team to make a decision about X? So that to me is our key decisions. Like, we need to be able to say by whatever, I'm making up dates, August 1st, we need to know what the meal distribution plan is, so we can get it out to families. We need to know what the transportation plan, whatever it is that we need to get out as a communications effort to families are. And I don't know, I worry about us being able to make that timeline in this short span of time, but we can try to start. But that's where I was. And I don't know if you all give me the thumbs up if you think that that's what we should be focused on. And if there's anything else, I think the other piece of it is, like you said, setting up that customer service component that is available at the beginning of school with people that are well trained and equipped with information that they can answer. Because the other thing too is having a customer service, a phone bank, and then people don't have all the information, and then people get frustrated because they're like, well, I'm glad you had glad I could call you, but you don't know what the heck I'm talking about. That always happens with transportation, right? At the beginning of the school year, people start to call the transportation line and they don't always have all the information, and then people get more frustrated and upset. So anyway, I think that's my suggestion, my thinking. I see John has his hand up a little, waiting to speak.
Yeah, you said two things quickly. One is one of the things that I think we get so focused on operations in terms of school opening and all the mechanics of that. one of the biggest questions that's out there that we're not, I think, yet doing, and maybe because we don't fully know the answers, but health and safety questions. Like this is what Dr. Hudson was saying earlier about what's going to be 3 to 6 feet. Again, there's some threshold questions about that families have that are creating high levels of anxiety that are making it difficult for them to hear other things.
Mhm.
And one of the things, for example, that you hear a lot in the community is, all right, if someone tests positive, what does that mean? All right, does that mean if a student tests positive, is it everybody in the classroom who's out? Is it the school that's shut down? Is it just what happens? And there's some threshold questions that we need answers to sooner, because until we get some of the health and safety questions resolved, people are going to have a difficult time. They're not going to trust the operational questions. We can tell them schedules and we can tell them everything else, but if they don't feel that the system is looking after health and safety, the rest of that stuff is not going to be heard. So I think that's one of the things we need to push back on, that those are things we ought to have answers to first. And those things need to get out before the plan comes out. Bottom line, here's what the rules are for how we're going to respond to an outbreak or how we're going to respond to something else. And that's stuff that we ought to be able to get the health department to weigh in on with us. The other thing is that in terms of resources, in terms of customer services, I think we're going to need to look beyond our traditional, what we normally think of as our resources. I think we ought to be, one of the resources we ought to seriously be thinking about are students and families for doing communication and training them up and empowering them to do some of that. We've had some success with that International Academy and reaching out to families. In fact, it's because many of our families look to their students have oftentimes are the ones that they look to sort of mediate the rest of the world and mediate the schools with. And so I think that we've got to think seriously about how do we incorporate the students that we are in contact with into the leadership teams, especially at the high school, but also other places. How do we build students in to get the resources we need to get communication out to families, because they're very capable and can be a big resource and help us on certain types of messages.
Yeah, and I will say, John, to add to that as well, so during this crisis, we've been using Canvas and a student kind of platform to connect directly with students, because we know that sometimes families don't get it. And we also know that sometimes families aren't even on contact data. So
Right.
this is just another avenue, and I think we just have to do that multi-tiered, outreach. But students have to be, because we have to see them as potential communicators. Their families may not know about food distribution centers, for example, but we can get to them directly and let them know if they are actually accessing our learning platforms through Chromebooks. They're going to get that message.
Well, and they rely on each other. And in the International Academy, hardly any of us use Canvas. And so one of the struggles we'll have is, but that's I think it's a good point, is sort of figuring out where that's a big gap, and knowing that, that's a gap that we have because of the way we operate. It means that we've got to figure a way around that. And so that's the kind of conversation I think we'll have to kind of build out what kind of networks we do.
The one benefit for us with Canvas is that we can see who is accessing and who is getting into that message, so we have data on it. So I'm tracking all of that data to make sure that I can say that for X message around on X date for food distribution, 5,092 access that message, went into at least viewed it at some point in some language. At least that gives me some kind of, I don't know, benchmark for working with. It gives us some kind of data as well. I think our data is really critical.
So I just want to say thank you all for being honest and upfront about what your concerns are, because I was feeling the same way and I wasn't sure I was alone. And I sort of checked in with Kurt yesterday and he was feeling the same way. So I was like, okay, at least I have an ally. I can bring this up. But I didn't want to taint the conversation. So I'm glad that we are all on the same page and that we feel the same angst around what decisions we need to make as a team, so that we can, and I think many of you said it earlier, that we're not flying by the seat of our pants at the end because we're getting information so late in the game. I think many of you have said, process, timelines, making sure that people get the information on time. Fluidity of information is going to really be difficult. I mean, yesterday, find the 3 feet to the 6 feet. I mean, that just, talk about a wrench, that changes everything. And so, and we're getting a lot of feedback from parents, even with the survey, that the American Academy of Pediatrics is basically telling everybody they should go back to school. Well, no kidding, but everyone wants to get to be back in school, but it's not really easy. And then, of course, we're not getting any money to do any of the stuff that they're asking us to do. So there's so many factors. So we have no idea what's coming. But I think for us, that we don't drive each other crazy, and nobody drives us crazy, that we come up with some firm deadlines of when we need information so that families can receive information in a timely manner, knowing that some of that information might have a grand plan, and that information may change and we might need to pivot, but at least we can feel a little more comfortable knowing that we've sort of set parameters around when we need information to get it out. So I feel like that, should be our work, but, hearing no objections, we'll move in that direction. We have an hour and 19 minutes left. I don't know if we need to spend too much time on the essential questions piece. We may want to just look over it really quick. I don't know if you want to go ahead and pull it up, Kurt. I saw that many of you added some things, but if we want to just sort of give it a glance, and
you should be able to, can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So
and
I know
going back to John Humphrey's point, he did make a point about non-negotiables is not the right word for it, but there are certain things that even before a kind of developed full plan is in place, there are some things that we should be able to know before that time, which is kind of like, maybe it is what do we do if a child is sick, comes into school, or identify, those type of things we may be able to figure out first and then go from there. That would help us too.
And Kurt, that's kind of the importance of all the other teams documenting their key decisions, because you guys are naming a key decision that the health and safety team needs to make. How are they going to be documenting cases in different schools? So we will know that. We will know when they're going to be making those decisions. And then if we see that there's a discrepancy of when they're going to be making those decisions to the timeline that communications knows that you need to communicate that out, or in order to translate it, or in order to put it in a variety of different models or methods or channels, that's when we can have a conversation across those two teams and talk about the timeline. So I love the idea of the timeline, Julia, that you're going to be putting forth or working on today, because that really those are the key decisions that you guys will be making. It's just in the form of a timeline right now. So that's perfect.
So let's just spend a few minutes looking at the essential questions and see if we feel like we've sort of need to add anything. Like I said, folks added some things. I had given it a glance this morning. It looks pretty robust to me. And I don't know if, and Sima, just remind me again, the point of the essential questions is that to drive the key decisions, or is it to just?
These are the questions that have been pulled together from the Virginia Department of Ed.
Okay.
That they shared with every division across Virginia. And so this is what they're expecting that divisions are having conversations on. We don't need to focus all of what we're doing on these essential questions, but the idea is, have we considered what this essential question, what the meat of the essential question is getting to? Are there key decisions we need to make in order to answer this essential question?
Okay.
Many of these are very broad still. As we know, state guidance has continued to maintain in a very broad way, like very broad. They change their minds often. So I don't think this isn't the North Star, but it is one of the stars in the sky that we know as guidance.
So here's what I'm thinking. And if I'm going in a totally different direction, you can tell me what you think, but I almost feel like we need a little bit of a brain dump exercise to sort of like to the point that John just made, like we need to put out the health and safety message. Like, what are the things that we need to make key decisions about, or what's the information that we need, in other words, that we need to, and then we can think about a timeline after that. I think we sort of need to figure out what are all the different points. Like if we were going to have a phone bank that we were going to launch in the start of school, when would we have to have that set up? When would we need to communicate that? So those kind of things, but I don't know if that's sort of taking us away from the work that we're supposed to be doing.
My only comment on that, and I think that's a great idea. I wouldn't try to answer the questions or identify the decisions that the other teams are focusing on. I would focus on what, based on, you guys are the ones really with the eyes and the ears for the families and for the greater community. So what is it that you know that families are going to need in terms of messages at which points ahead of school opening, and then we can then align that to the key decisions that the other groups are identifying need to be made as part of their teams.
That's exact. I mean, I probably didn't explain it right, but that's what I meant.
Perfect.
So, and I see that, Krishna, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so when I was looking at this last night, I had a couple of questions. For example, when we talk about, disseminating information, there was one that was in yellow that said frequency of dissemination. So the frequency is not as important as the methods of communication that are going to be used, because overloading families with information will do no good, right? But also, what capacity do we have to turn this information, translate it at the same time that it's going out to everybody else? We know that that's an issue. So how do we collaborate with the department? Or we might have to go and get some waivers to contract people, so we have them on staff during that time, so we can actually get that translation, because we are counting with on the same staff that is already overworked to actually do that. So information is not going to go out as fast. So that might present an issue as well. So maybe I'm just thinking too much into the weeds, but we collected on the parent info lines a lot of the questions that parents were asking that were not actually all the same as the one that were on the website, if that makes sense. So we know that is going to happen. So how do we prepare for it?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Krishna, it seems to me like a key decision around this would be whether we need to enlist some outside help with the quick turnaround with translations that we need, right? Simma's giving us a thumbs up. So, and I'm hoping that, I know, Shanna, you're capturing these notes, right? Because I'm not writing anything down at this point. But it seems like that's a great suggestion, and we need to look at that, and then we'll have to sort of talk about how we would do that.
The other thing,
go into the
key decisions. Yeah.
If you go into the document in the workbook, the last section in the workbook is the key decisions. You got it. You're doing the tab flipping that I always do. So keep scrolling down a little bit more. There you go. So we would need to make that decision, I think, regardless of whether we were in Model 1, Model 2, or Model 3, we would add. So you can maybe just add it. Well, you can add it in one of them and say across all, and I'll make that note.
The other point that I wanted to make when we talk about the phone bank, if we're going to have people, answering those, again, we will need the capacity. Might be something that we have to reach out to other departments that might have staff that can help, because capacity, it is definitely going to be an issue. We are seeing it right now with the summer learning and the staff that we have answering the line.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that the key decisions will be, are we going to be talking to Julie to see if some of her staff can join us, because she has staff that are bilingual, that are admin, and can help to answer those lines.
That's a really good point. We'll have to talk to HR about that. I will tell you that we in Arlington, when I was there, we did that with some of our food distribution sites, folks that were not able to telework, because we have no idea what fall is going to look like, if people are going to actually be in the buildings, but people that weren't able to telework but were still getting paid, we reassigned them for like 10 hours a week to do other things. There's some challenges with that, because you're sort of basically giving them a different job assignment, and it's not something they're contracted to do or whatever, but we can talk about who those staff might be that we could actually enlist help with, especially on that first week of school or moving into the opening of school. So I think that's definitely something we can explore. I don't,
So
Terry, do you have any thoughts about that? I see Terry has joined us. Dr. Mazingo has joined us. So is that something we've talked about or explored in the past?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was right. Good morning, everybody. I was responding to hi, everybody was responding, popping in and out of these. Great conversation. I was responding to John's statement in the chat about making sure that the community, I think about the community, not being misled and going in the wrong direction. So I was just commenting on about maybe frequency of communication might help people kind of understand the direction we're going in, knowing that there might be some unintended misunderstandings. So I was just commenting on that. And the second, I wanted to comment, I think I heard Simma say it earlier, I was in one of the other teams, and it is true that they're now asking questions about, like, they need communication support, they need more financial guidance. So I think when we bring all the teams together, like she said, there are some decision points that cross other teams. So we'll be able to answer some of that. And I'm sorry, can you tell me your question? I was focusing on that.
No worries. Krishna was making the point that, because we sort of need an all hands on deck approach as we move into the start of the school year, and then as school sort of kicks off and people have questions or need to help navigate. And I was explaining that when I was in Arlington, we had sort of done some of that, where we looked at some of the staff that we could enlist help with, and we sort of reassigned them for 10 hours a week. So I was saying that, we'd have to talk to HR about that, because for some people, they're contracted or they have specific guidelines around what they can and cannot do. And so the different departments identified who was able to do that without having any restrictions. And so we could talk to HR about that, but I wasn't sure if that was something that had already been explored. That's what I was wondering.
It's interesting you bring that up. It hasn't been explored here just yet, but in the one of the groups, they were just asking about that. Mostly, they were asking about certain roles that, for example, that in the schools that receive stipends. They said but those roles might change, and could they be assigned other responsibilities? So there will be a discussion when we all come together at some point about different roles that could be utilized differently to assist in different areas. They mentioned the science fair, for example. There's a stipend at the science fair. Well, it may be that that's modified somewhat, and there is a group of people that would be available. They mentioned the instructional assistants, and maybe ways in paraprofessionals. So I think I'm answering your question, but there will be a review of certain roles that they did mention that receive stipends that could be utilized differently to assist in different areas. Is that what you did in Arlington?
Well, actually, what we did in Arlington was whoever was not able to telework, didn't have a device, or didn't have the ability, or just couldn't do their job at home, and was basically on the payroll, but enjoying some time off. So we reassigned them for 10 hours a week to do other things, and mostly with our meal distribution. So I think
that'll be good. That'll happen as a result of that survey that Clinton sent out. That's what I think Fairfax did, or Arlington did. Once they got the survey, then they could identify these employees that might be high risk. Some employees that may not be able to return because someone in their family might be sick. So then the question is, how do you utilize those employees? So that data will help all of us make those decisions. Absolutely. I know in one system, they actually are utilizing some of those employees to assist with distance learning. So absolutely. So you'll bring some good ideas in that area for us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think thank you, Krishna. I think that is another key decision. It is. What kind of help, all right, beyond our scope and the bandwidth that we currently have, what help are we going to need for facilitating some of the ideas that we have, specifically on the engagement piece. So John, Tanika's had her hand raised for a little bit. So I'm going to go to her first, and then I'll take your question, John.
Well, I dropped these in the notes just to follow up on Krishna's suggestion that when we stood up the ACPS Meals Hotline at the beginning of closure, that we did have directors of other departments volunteer some of their casual employees who weren't able to do much from home to help us manage those hotlines. So it seems like there is maybe an informal process for having us get support from other departments to do this type of work and increase our bandwidth.
So I think that, I'm sorry, John, I'll give you in a second. I think to add to that, Tanika, then another key decision is, because one of the things that we want to avoid at all, if possible, not going to be super clean, but I think one of the things we want to avoid is having people jump to do a whole bunch of different things. So if someone's trained in a specific area, you know, like having teams of people that are helping with certain things, because then information is constantly flowing. But if you have sort of like a team that's helping with the hotline, a team that's helping with food, teams helping with this messaging, we can better prepare them with information rather than having them sort of pitch and, you know, be floaters and things like that. So I think that is another key decision. Well, how many people will we need for each piece that we're trying to move forward, and thinking about that. So I know we don't have all the answers to these questions right now, but I'm sort of synthesizing what you're saying and trying to make sure that I understand what you're proposing. Is that what you're proposing, Tanika?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right, John, I know you've been waiting.
Sorry, yeah, no, I would just, it's a bit of a framing question. We tend to, I think, organizationally think like a bureaucracy and a hierarchy, because that's what we are. Which means that we think about here, what are the resources we have and how do we push things out? And I think that one of the, what that results oftentimes is that I see from the bottom is we miss lots of folks, because we sort of assume that if we put it out there, people get it. And I think that one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to think more as organizers and less as an institution, and think about who are the people who need the messages and what are the ways that they communicate. And how do we plug into those channels, and what resources do we have that connect with those? So if we're thinking about it from the bottom up rather than from the top down, and we're thinking about, all right, we've got however many, 14 schools, you know, within those schools are certain, you know, institutions. How do we reach out to those? Obviously, there's going to be some overlap. Families have kids in two different schools. But if we're thinking about it in terms of, all right, it's, you know, Cora Kelly Elementary School. Well, how does Cora Kelly Elementary School communicate? What are the people in that community? What are the informal means of communication? How do they communicate with one another? How does the school communicate with them? And if we think about building the communication system from the ground up, then we're less likely to have gaps that we'll miss. And so even within TC, you see it kind of obvious. We have lots of different sort of subcultures, and, you know, within different pieces of that, like there's a whole, like all the orchestra kids talk to each other, right? All the choir kids talk to each other. The kids within the IA have multiple, you know, sort of networks, you know, internally. Some families are in a certain neighborhood and communicate with themselves. And if we're thinking about starting with making sure who are the people we're trying to communicate to, and then what are the systems we need to put in place to communicate with them, we can make sure that we're getting the coverage that we need. And it may be then we can make decisions about how to deploy people, because what we tend to do is tend to broadcast everything, and we probably need to be thinking more about narrowcasting and working through existing structures as much as possible. The broadcasting is important because that's how, but it only reaches the people, the same people it always reaches. And I think we're mostly worried about, in some ways, about how do we fill those gaps of people who aren't going to pick up the phone and call face, you know, because they've already got that relationship and know that exists, or they aren't going to pick up the phone and, you know, and call whomever.
Thanks, John. So I just wanted to welcome Dr. Hutchings to our group. I don't know if you want to share anything, but I see that, Fran, you have your hand raised. So I'll go to you first, and then if I'm sure you want to hear more of our discussion and then chime in, Dr. Hutchings. Fran?
So I kind of, what John was saying is exactly what I am or have been thinking. And to look at, in what we've done already, the summer, the virtual learning, how did we, when we did reach those families that were hard to reach, how did we do it? And I just know at the school level, we had, we first informed the staff. The staff knew exactly what was going on, and they had the answers to the questions. Those talking points that we had when we had those stand-up meetings that were exactly the same, we all had it. And the teachers created a Google Doc. I'm not reaching this kid. I'm not reaching this kid, which prompted SST to say, these are the kids that are missing, which prompted the parent liaison to go and call and find those parents, which prompted the ELL teachers that work with them to go to their house. I mean, so it's just this process of finding out which means of communication are the best means to reach those families. I hear you talking about this hotline. How many people call this hotline? Because I don't think anyone in my community called the hotline. They were all calling us. So what is the best, what are our parents doing to try to find information and make sure we set up those processes and structures in advance, even if we don't have information right now, we start setting up those processes.
Yeah, we used a similar system in the IA. We had a database with all 700 kids, and teachers were calling. Every time you called, you logged in what the communication was about. Social workers went through and followed up phone calls. Teachers on teams went through and followed up phone calls, and we just kept pushing until we, got to everybody. And we're constantly asking and following up, and we kept track of those communications. And that was the only way we knew we were getting out, that we were getting to folks, and that way we could target resources in the right places.
I can tell you, Priyan, you're getting calls on your end. John, it sounds like the International Academy get calls, and all the, different questions. I can tell you from our FACE standpoint in our area, we get loads of calls and texts through our hotlines. I mean, it's constant. So you're seeing a lot of different families feeling who they're comfortable with reaching out to, and they do it through that system. So if a parent is very comfortable with the International Academy, they're going to try to figure out their answers through that lens, or maybe it's a teacher. But for many parents, they say, I understand that FACE is the way I can get some answers. So I'm going to go through FACE system. So I think you're just seeing what parents, which we've assumed would happen, they're going to go out to what they feel comfortable in getting an answer from. It just shows, again, we're going to need to be very clear going into this next school year of how do they get answers so that it's not a capacity issue for any area.
So I just wanted to, before we move on, I just wanted to bring Dr. Hutchings up to speed on what we're talking about, and then give him an opportunity to share anything that he, based on what he's hearing. So what we're talking about is, we had sort of a little bit of a check-in in the beginning of the call. We were all feeling a little angst in terms of like what our key decisions would be, because we all felt like our key decisions are predicated on everybody else's key decisions. And so we're really focused on creating a timeline for when we need information to be able to successfully communicate out to the community, and for sort of giving that guidance to the other teams. And so that's one thing we're talking about. The other thing we're talking about is sort of what are the things that we need to be communicating, and when and how. And so we're sort of having a little bit of a discussion around that. We've put a couple of key decisions in our workbook. I think we've had some really good suggestions thus far, but that's where we are right now, sort of almost a little bit of a brain dump in terms of what it is that we need to be thinking about in terms of how do we communicate and who and the channels that we use. So did I summarize that well? Yes? Okay. So Dr. Hutchings, anything you want to share with us at this point, or you just want to continue to listen in?
I'm just going to continue to listen in and just, encourage you all to just keep talking like you're talking, as candid as you're being, because, I think the key for us at this particular time is having multiple channels of communication. So not just deciding what is one form of doing it. What works at Polk is not going to work in Patrick Henry or Mount Vernon, or, so I think we do need to rely on the schools, though, and finding out what their particular school community, kind of like what they respond to, and try to adjust. But I think trying to have a universal way of communication would not be the right thing for us to do at this time, because so many families have different means of communication. Some prefer phone calls, some prefer email, some prefer PTA, some prefer newsletter, some prefer calling face. You know, there's so many different channels, and I think that the more we have multiple ways, the better that we're going to get everybody involved. Now, I think even though we have these multiple ways, we're going to need to have consistent messaging. And I think that's going to be key so that, you know, if you make a call, you're going to get the same kind of response that you would if you sent somebody an email, or if you talk to a principal, or if you talk to FACE, or if you talk to a teacher. You know, like the messaging is going to need to be the same so that we don't have a lot of misinformation or confusion out in the community. But those are only comments. It's great hearing you all talk about it, which is.
I think you're definitely right on target. I think one of the things that we struggle with in schools, and we all do, is when it snows, right? And so the messages that we have to go out when it snows and everyone's upset and they think we made a terrible decision. And it's funny because last year when in the fall, I said to the team, we need to create a bank of answers, because I'm so sick of having to do this at 5 o'clock in the morning to start writing answers to why people are upset about snow decisions. And so we created this whole list of answers to different types of scenarios. You know, we closed and it snowed anyway. I mean, it didn't snow. We closed, we opened and it snowed, it was terrible. You know, we have all those things. But I think what was really critical about that is that we could easily write up a quick email, but was that everyone else that was getting calls around the school division didn't have the same answers that we were giving. And so there was all this misinformation that was going out as to why we closed or why we made a decision. And so this way we could say, all right, we're going with answer 1 today. And we would pass it out to everybody, they'd have it, and everyone was ready to go. So we wouldn't have to have all this inconsistency of messages, and then would create more emails. And I know this sounds like a simple thing, but on the morning of you're getting 100 emails in 5 minutes about snow, you need to be able to respond right away. People are upset, they don't know what to do, they don't know where to call. And so I think the same kind of thinking we should have around this. What are anticipating the questions that we're going to get, having the answers, sort of giving people the guidance of what we want people to communicate on a given day, or what it is that's going on at the time, sort of thinking that through. It makes things so much smoother, and it ensures that everyone is singing off the same sheet of music, and you're not having all this misinformation out there that then causes even more upset and confusion in the community. So I say that to say we did all that work and we had no snow days this year. I couldn't believe it. I was like, we didn't even get to use our beautiful tool, but it's okay. We had a pandemic instead.
But your point is you were ready. And that's what we need to do here is be ready. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's going to be important for this whole process. And like I just keep preaching the same messages. We are going to need to have some information to sponge up so that we are ready to then disseminate.
Agreed. So I think
I think it's going to be important for us to be able to sponge up that information, but ask questions before it's ready to go out. Because I think sometimes we are in that mode where we do get the information and it's like, okay, this is what the message is, but we know some of the questions that parents will have about it that haven't been factored into yet. So I think that adding that timing would be important as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I think, so I'm going to say maybe another key decision point, and I'll throw it out there and see if you all agree, is that we create a document of anticipated questions and we get all the answers and we have them ready to go, and then we share them with everyone when we feel good about them. And then as we continue to get information that's changing rapidly, that document is updated, and we can continue to, we can say every Friday we're going to send out the new, question sheet, and it'll have all the updated information, whatever we feel makes sense in terms of when we send that out, so that everyone has the same information every single time. Because like you said, people are getting calls all different places that we may not anticipate. And so at least everyone has the same thing, and we're not creating more confusion in the community. Because I think to Delena's point earlier with summer school, there was a lot of misinformation, or people didn't know how to navigate the system, and then it just creates this log jam for everyone else, and takes you away from the work that you're trying to do because you're too busy trying to fix or do damage control. And we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. So I know, Shauna, you're taking notes for this, so I hope you captured that one. And because I know, Kurt, you're not adding anything right now to the key decisions list, right? We're just sort of like, we'll agree to the end.
I just put some, here's what I put in there. I'll share it with you. I've just been putting just our little notes basically in here. You'll see I just put some things in the key decision. We could certainly change these, but I just wanted to capture it a little bit.
Okay.
Just to try to do that so that we have it. You know, just little stuff, but trying.
No, it's good. I mean, I think both of you, between you and Shannon, will have
Yeah.
a sort of.
I'm actually adding to our communication plan as we get that out too.
Perfect. Okay. So I think we may want to spend the rest of our time thinking about the timeline piece and when we realistically feel that we need to have some of these decisions made so we can share them with the other teams. And I know that's really difficult to sort of think about from a 6 or 7 week standpoint that we have right now. But I think your point earlier, John, about health and safety, you know, is that the first message we come out with? Like, this is the, so, you know, it could be bucketed. Like, we have 1 week we're sort of focused on messaging around this. The next week we're focused on you know, so if we want to sort of parse it out that way, unless anybody else has any other suggestions. But I feel like that's where we should sort of spend the rest of our time thinking about those key decisions.
The only question I have, and I agree, I think we should I think it's a good idea to chunk information. My only question with that is, just the only concern is, going back to Krishna's point, sometimes when we chunk information, it takes time to translate that information. So it's just making sure that we have a couple, you know, whatever time in advance of that chunk to make sure all are getting it on the same day, same time, basically, or at least trying to attempt, so that everybody has that at the, you know what I mean, consistent. Yeah.
And that's why I was thinking about if we did buckets, so that we're very prepared in terms of when we're going to send out information about health and safety, when we're going to send information about transportation, when are we going to do information about meals. So it's sort of like, we know this is what we're focused on this given week, or, you know, these are the messages for this given week. We got the translation team ready to go. We got the messaging ready, so that we're not sending out, first of all, loads of information at one time, and as well as having to have everything ready at the same time, because I think that that's going to be impossible as well. So that's just my thought, but I don't even know if that's even feasible.
I'm not sure. Can I just jump in? I'm not sure that week to week is going to work. I think that we're going to find that our timeline is a much shorter timeline than what, you know, to get that information. So that by the time people are ready to share that information, say on transportation or
You're breaking up, Helen, so we're not hearing you.
Things, it'll be the end of July, beginning of August, and we're going to be basically more feasible instead of weeks. Just a thought.
Yeah, two questions. One is, how long does it take us to get a one-page document into the languages we need to get it into? To Kurt's point.
It's usually
is it 24 hours? Is it a week?
Yeah.
It'll depend, right, on what's on the plate of our in-house translators. But if we do go with the idea that Krishna put forward about having external vendors or contractors, we could probably get it turned around in 24 hours. I think the concern is that we just don't want to put out one-page written documents for our population, that we would want video and audio messages to make sure that that information is being absorbed and understood by the families. I think the written translation is, Krishna will argue with me, is probably the easiest part of it. If we can get external folks to do it, it's that video messaging and the other multimedia aspects of it.
We know that we then, in our previous experience with outside vendors, it's not always the best translation. So then we have to have time built in for people to read through it in the various languages and make sure that it makes sense, especially with like Amharic and Arabic. It often comes back like a Google Translate from outside vendors.
Right.
So my students.
I'm sorry, hit John, and then I just want to ask them a question.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to, Sima, help out here because I feel like I want to make sure that we're doing the work we need to do today. But I was almost thinking, I wonder if we should look at what other people are putting down as their key decisions, and then that could sort of help inform what we're deciding. Because I think going back to the beginning, when the angst that I had was that we have no timing on anything. So it's hard for us to build that timelines until we know when people are going to have their decisions made. And so,
yeah, I mean, I have this sense that, I mean, part of what we're going to struggle with is that we're accustomed to regular school timeline, where we all know what the play is every year. It's the same play every year. And we have things that go on a certain schedule, and we're accustomed to having lots of time. And I am more as concerned as anybody about communicating in multiple languages with students. I also feel like the environment we're in is one much more akin to crisis communications than the normal kind of plan that we'd have. And I think that so I'm trying to balance those two things. My inclination is to try to push stuff out as fast as we can in whatever modes we can, recognizing that there's going to be delay. Because I think that if we wait until everything's perfect, and we have every mode of communications we need and every language we need, and we don't put anything out until we have that, nothing will go out until September. And so I think we've got to make sure that we've got to, and it'll get easier once we do this a couple of times on different things. But I do think that there are certain things that we've got to just push out as we can and recognize there's going to be lag. As much as I hate it, there's going to be a lag for certain communities. I mean, this kills me with my, especially with my Amharic speaking and Arabic speaking students all the time. I can make Spanish happen like that. Between my own Spanglish and my, and other things. Always, I'm always, my Dari speakers, especially, half the time I'm having to trust that what they're telling me is what they're doing. And it's imperfect and it's difficult, but it is. But I don't know that in this situation. I mean, we're 5 weeks. We're 5 weeks out. I mean, it's like this is a campaign the 1st of October. It's just a mess, and it's going to be a mess, I think. And we just got to push and push hard and make sure we're trying to get things done cleaning up as much as possible.
Sean.
I am less concerned about the actual translation timeline than I am about having the information and knowing what we're sharing. I think that's my concern. I feel like at the moment we don't have that bucketed into a week or a timeline or a chart so that we know what we're sharing. The translation, honestly, from our perspective, has been phenomenal, and I have to trust that Victor's done he's going to continue to do such a great job with it. He's flexing wherever he can. We are handing him documents, he's giving it about the same day or literally sometimes overnight. So I don't feel like the translation is a time lag or has been so much of an issue. We're translating everything right now, and we're pretty much getting it out simultaneously, if not a couple of hours or a few hours later. So I feel like that's okay. I'm more worried, I think, like you, Julia, I think what are we communicating and at what points and when, and also, with our whole webinar / community chats, that worries me too. We don't have a structure for that. I feel like we need structure. And once we have the structure, we can put, that's the bones. Once we have the bones, we can then put the flesh on it, and we can then finesse how we're communicating and add the translation.
So before, Shannon, I'm sorry, and I know that and Priyan has her hands up too, but I do want to hear from Sema, because I want to make sure that we're going in the right direction. Because she's sort of been facilitating all these pieces, and she's been hearing from other teams. So I just want to kind of get her perspective before we continue with the conversation. Thank you.
I wouldn't rush the key decisions that are coming out of the other teams. They're going to be, we met yesterday as chairs, and all of them feel confident that by the end of today's session that they will have the list of key decisions. And then tomorrow the chairs are going to be looking across all the different key decisions. So Julia, you'll have access to all of those, and you can share them with the rest of your team as we start to organize them into which decisions need to be made first. We recognize that scheduling decisions and transportation decisions are the two most important ones. And those are going to be those are going to be predicated on how we are addressing and dealing with the health and safety guidance from both the state, the CDC, the WHO, all of these different layers. So that's, and then also budget and our ability from a supply standpoint to address all the new budget requirements coming out of all of the different teams. So that's really the work. I think what would be great, and I kind of liked what Helen was just going towards, of for the messages that we know that we need to get out during this process over the next 3 weeks, how is it that we want to stage those conversations and those messages? How is it that we want to engage with, whether it's the translation services, video services, all of these other complementary services? And so as the teams are making decisions, and we know that we want almost immediate community input, what is that process? What can that process look like? How can we stage that communication in the next 2 or 3 weeks? And then we can talk about, as we're moving towards opening of schools and giving student assignments and transportation routes and all of those pieces, I think that's the next set of conversations and decisions. What is the timeline for that? And I don't know, Julie, if you wanted me to share, I can flash up that draft timeline that we shared with the chairs last week, just so everyone can kind of see what's being done when.
Sure, absolutely. I think that maybe where I'm getting stuck, and that happens to me sometimes, is I'm very deadline driven, and everyone else yesterday was saying they were going to have their key decisions by today, and I'm like, well, I want our team to have our key decisions, but I almost feel like we can't. I feel like we can't do it without seeing what other key decisions are from the other groups, and I don't want to feel like we're not doing our work, and so that's where I'm stuck.
Julie, I think one of the things that
we can put together, though.
Yeah, and Julie, I think to Helen's point, one of the things we can do too is to say, here's what we need to get things out so that they understand. And also, to the extent we can identify, all right, here's what you're thinking is important from an operational standpoint. Here's what we know the community needs, and you all have got to get. These are some other things you've got to think about as well, and you might be thinking about on a different. This may affect your timeline for the order in which you are thinking about things.
So I'm just gonna. Priyanne has had her hand up for a while, and I just wanted to make sure we were going in the right direction with Selma. But Priyanne, did you want to share something?
I just have this vision. So you're right about all this translating and every time it's going to take, and it's going to be last minute. One of the things that was really well done with the virtual was that Dr. Hutchins had a 2 o'clock a 2 o'clock webinar for families and a 3 o'clock webinar for staff. And when this information is finally ready for us to present something to the community, why couldn't we have him and the leads of these teams doing a webinar? The webinars are such that you can have one in English and you can have a breakout session in Amharic, a breakout session in Spanish, a breakout session in Arabic. So everyone sees the whole conversation and the whole what's going out, but within their session, they're hearing it in their translation. Waiting for something to get translated and redone, when we can give the information live in that forum, have it translated, they get to ask questions, we answer questions. That would create a document of here were the common questions as answers. And then most things are word of mouth. And then for those people who weren't savvy enough or didn't get on, word of mouth starts going, here's what we had at the meeting. Here's what was said. It was said all at once to everyone in the city. And we all had the same message at the same time and didn't worry about having to go to another link. I just think like starting with something like that would be a good way to manage all this how do we get things in other languages?
So, I mean, this is the way that we did it before. That's exactly the same format that we used up until the summer when I think the superintendent decided he wasn't going to do the webinars anymore. But we were using that. We were doing, at one point, we were doing webinars every day, I think. And then we moved to 3 days, and we moved to 2 days, or one, I think. And all of those were translated. Everything was, an FAQ was created off the back of them, and all of those FAQs were also translated and also posted to the web, and then shared out again via Insider and Express and social media and
Right.
to schools, and you know,
Right.
so it was basically, that was the central part of the communication that was then disseminated. And I think that's the way the format, I guess the you know, one way that we can use again. It did work for a bit.
After the fact, we didn't need to do it every day. I agree with him that there was a time that he needed to stop. But for the first message that comes out, to make it that it's something that everyone hears the same message, the same questions are being answered, and it's in every language, that's the quickest way to get it out. And then piggybacking on that with all these other options, who didn't reach it, call SST, then that would just be the best way to get it all done at once, to me, or to get it, because then you have people who can ask questions.
So we have about 35 minutes left, and I definitely want to spend the time sort of getting some more things down. I see that Shanna has her hand raised. I'm going to have you share, and then I think we need to really think about what are the immediate tasks at hand that we need to sort of get down, that we need as a team, so that we can help communicate that with the other chairs. So Shanna, I'll let you talk, and then we'll move on.
Very quickly, to Krishna's point, I want to raise that up in the chat box. Nearly half, if I'm right, half of our parents are Spanish speaking, and they do not watch those webinars most often. And so we really have to think of other avenues outside of that. And I think when we talk about everything written being translated, maybe the general information, but then once they click to the form, whether it's health registration, whether it's trying to get a Khajiit, a Chromebook, all of those forms are only in English. So it is definitely not equitable, because even if we drive our families to that information, they can't complete it. So and I want to say, so John suggested in chats as well, like those are things we should be having translated now, because there's still going to be Wi-Fi issues. There's going to be Chromebook issues. There's going to be registration. All of those forms should be translated.
Doesn't this all lend to what Julia is asking us to do, is to put some processes in place that make sense from what we've learned from before?
Yes.
So I'm a visual person, so I think about a decision or a chunk of information that comes into the funnel, and then we have an idea of how to cover all our families using the different methods for whatever decision, but it's a consistent kind of funnel. And then I'm doing my visual branches that will be consistent in terms of getting that message out in a timely fashion.
So I think, Anna, I don't know, or Kurt, if you want to just sort of do a recap of the key decisions that we've already talked about, and see if everyone's in agreement, and then what do we need to add to that? Unless you want to pull it up. I know you've been doing some jotting, Kurt, and if you want to put it up on the screen, we can do that too. What works better?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it back. Hold on a minute. Let me see if I can find it.
And I did just, I think it was John that asked the.
Priyanne, you're still, mute yourself, Priyanne.
I actually have a summary as well if you need it. I mean, because I've been adding to the plan to make sure that I'm getting all the notes too. So if anyone's struggling, I'll step in.
Here is the.
Sorry. I'm trying to mute myself.
Here's the key decision points area, just so everybody can see it. And so everybody has access to this book, hopefully. You can add in kind of any kind of drafty thoughts, and I'm sure we can kind of work from there. But there's certainly something to be said about some type of consistent way to funnel through communications, making sure that we reach all families.
I was just thinking, maybe it's interesting. So I know Tanika suggested, like, a flow chart or something else. Maybe we literally tell people this is how we're going to be sharing the communication with you. So we have that flow chart up there, and we say we are going to be, I don't know, starting with a superintendent webinar, or starting with Express, and then we're going to have a superintendent webinar off the back of it. This will be translated. If you're Arabic and Amharic, this is what you need to do. This is how you're going to get it through a text message, through Canvas. Maybe the flow chart, the visual, just to show people that we have a process might actually help as well. And then also, John, building in some of that narrowcasting that I've added to our communication plan as well, you know, off the back of your mentioned earlier. And we build in some of that too, to say then you're also going to get it through your social media liaison, you're going to get it through your, you know, student rep, you're going to get it through, you know, IA reps or IA student groups, or, you know, those other orchestra groups, the athletics department, you know, will disseminate it through by their coaches. Those other narrowcasting, then we can basically create this network of how we're going to share this visual. That might help. I'm just thinking for something like this, Kurt.
Okay, so any other thoughts about what we need to include?
I would just echo what Helen was saying about communicating how we will be communicating with families. That we did that with the ACPS Meals Hotline. We had a flow chart, and there was a really clear sort of process for how families could contact us and how they would receive information. And we found that to be really helpful and appreciated.
So Sema, I'm just curious, with the other groups, are people sort of designating owners of each of these things, or is it is that one of the pieces that's being added?
Yeah, so right now folks are focusing in on what are the key decisions, which you guys have been naming key decisions this entire time. Which channels are we going to use to communicate? How are we going to be able to translate real time? How can we make sure that in what ways are we making sure that our messages are being received in these different sub-communities? Like you are identifying all of these key decisions as part of this. And I think that a lot of the angst is the fact that there are so many key decisions to make and we may not be ready. It's hard sometimes to start answering them if we don't know what the full circle is. And I think that's been, actually the meat of this has been around that. You'll see in the next section of this workbook is then, and this is part of next week's work, is understanding, which we will populate on in the stakeholder side, we will populate, and I just started creating a table here, but if you keep going down a little bit further, Kurt, we will start identifying who are going to be the different leads to make the different decisions and to implement whatever it is that we are looking to implement. Now, this will look a little different for communications than it is for anyone else. I know this is a newer team, but this is part of your roles. And for a lot of other teams, they've never tackled stuff like this before. So that is coming next, is who's going to be doing what. I did start to make a table if you want to scroll back up, Kurt. And this is just purely out of what people were talking about. We know that the next few things that we're going to want to communicate have to do with the big activities that we're going to be engaging in as a division. So we're going through the survey now. And so I'm assuming that we would want to share survey results and share communication back out to families that we heard you. Here's what we heard. Here's what we're doing with the information. And then again, starting to plan for the community conversations. What information do we need in order to conduct the community conversations? What messages would we be creating? This, Julia, I just, based on what folks were saying, I started to create this quick table, and we can use this or we can continue to just document the key decisions, whatever makes sense for this team.
Okay. So you're talking about the table, the what information do we need, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it looks like Helen's been putting together the skeleton of a communications plan, from what I'm hearing, that she shared earlier. So I think that would be helpful for her to share with the group, and outside of, this workbook, and that may help to fuel some of the other pieces. And then we could also think about, who would own it, who would work on it, those kinds of things, from that standpoint. I don't know. I'm just trying to think about what's the best way for us to use the rest of our time, because of the unknowns, but thoughts about how we sort of continue with this work I think some people, you know, you said we made some key decisions. I think we have, but I'm just wondering if we can make any more decisions at this point, given that there's information that we don't have. So that's.
I think, I don't know, Julian, maybe I could just make a suggestion that possibly we could start discussing our timeline. I don't think that's going to be fixed today, but I feel like maybe there are some pieces that we could discuss as a team, not for kind of after August the 7th, but in the lead up to August the 7th, you know, from now till then. And then knowing, I mean, I've got the deliverables list for August the 7th, but like when and how we put those pieces in, that's like to be discussed. But maybe, I think for me, the thing that's worrying me is like the moment between now and August the 7th. What does that look like for us as a timeline? I don't know if that's worth a conversation in terms of deliverables.
Absolutely. That is a very important conversation. And if you all feel that you have enough information at this point to create that, then let's go for it. So
I think the first thing that can go out is what Helen talked about in how we're going to communicate. And then the second thing, being the what did you say, John? The health and safety. So can we put some timelines on those two first? Helen, how soon can you pull together, or are you the one to pull it together? Like this is how we're going to communicate. Is someone ready to do that? And then maybe share with us, and we maybe put a timeline of when we think that should go out. And then
I mean, we're on a Wednesday cycle right now, Wednesday to Wednesday. So I'm going to suggest that we aim to put that in as our update in Express Insider next week. So we would need to get that signed off and kind of worked on Monday.
Okay.
And so my question, because it seems right to me that goes first. My next question then is, right now, for example, the flow chart that we have that sort of lays out the schedule of when decisions are going to be made is sitting on the website, and it was connected in the ECPS Express.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the other means of communication that we were talking about, there just hasn't been bandwidth yet, I think, to push it out in those other channels. So if you're not a regular consumer of ACPS Express or the website, I think most people in the community don't know that flow chart or that decision line actually exists. And so one of the things that this might give us an opportunity to do over the next week is to practice figuring out how do we get a fairly complicated, well, in some ways it's simple, like go here and look at this information, but how do we get this information out and use the next week to try to figure that out.
I agree, and I actually think there are two things of how do we communicate. So I think there are two different kind of things we need to kind of put into a flowchart here. One is when we receive a new bit of information that we have to get out, how do we then disseminate that internally first to make sure that FACE has the right information, that principals have the right information, that there's an internal flowchart and then there's an external flowchart. And honestly, I would far rather focus on the internal flowchart right now. I mean, in a perfect world, we'll have both ready for next Wednesday to disseminate, but they are different. They are different, you know. How we share with parents. Parents don't need to know that we are then sharing with principals, who are then sharing with their APs, who are then sharing with their staff. They don't need to know that, but they do need to know, you know, that they're part of it. And I think there's two different flowcharts. But we have a whole range of communication, John, you're right, and we make sure that we don't sit back on Express. Every time Express Insider goes out, there's a whole flow of text messages in multiple languages that go out with it. There is a whole series of communications that we do off the back of it, which is why it is not an easy process for us to now just test out. And you know, every day was exhausting our team because it's a long, laborious process. Delana will testify to that.
And at the school level, what we like to do is just retweet, repost, resend out the exact same message. So once it gets sent out in whatever way it gets sent out, even if that's Insider, if it's supposed to go to the community, then our PR people at our school will then push that out, or I as a principal can push that out in an email because they do read mine, thank God. And then if it's a link for something that's getting ready to happen, then the PR people put it out. But it starts with the insider, and then there are people who, so that it's the same information. And then there are people within the schools who put it out in ways that are reach. And then we just have, and I think every school is like this. I don't think I'm speaking for this, but like you said, for the people not reading the webinars, our staff does. And then they take that information and they go to the families. Immediately, my ELL team has these 15, they go to the families. So I think starting it in the insider, then just leave it to the building to get the message out in ways that they think reach more people.
Yeah, and I also think it's going to be important to recognize that there's a difference between communicating with elementary school families and communicating with families at the high school or even the middle schools.
Yeah.
If the communications, I mean, because the elementary schools are small, or just because of the nature of the kids, there's going to be one channel. At the high school, outside of the International Academy, there is no structure really in which there is a connection between families. There's no communication structure other than a general email blast or tweet that goes out. And so while we've got a structure of teachers and social workers who are calling all the time, that doesn't exist anywhere else within the high school. And so one of the things that we've got to think hard about is how do you reach those families outside of, I mean, even ours is very imperfect. I mean, it's a structure, it's not a perfect structure. But there isn't even anything like that outside, and it's because of the unique way that we're organizing the teams. We've got a group of faculty responsible for a very particular group of kids. But the other 3,000 kids at the high school don't have that kind of a structure. So we've got to think about how you get the word out.
So
what
Shannon
do you think? What is the way?
Brianne, I'm sorry. Shannon's had her hand raised for a little bit. Let's hear what she has to say, and then we'll head to you. You're on mute.
Shanna, you're on mute.
Okay. I was just saying that as we think about the timeline and what we need to do to move forward, there's a couple things that I've captured that we've said even before sending out I know we've said health and safety information first, but, and I think I'm kind of echoing what people were just saying, but the points that I've included here that we need to do as key decisions and maybe establish timelines around first is sharing the survey results back to the families. When are we doing that by? We're planning the community conversations that are supposed to happen the week of July 20th. What do we need to do around that? Establishing the key messages and the FAQs. We can start coming up with what those questions are going to be and what some of the answers are going to be with flexibility. Developing and training the multilingual triage teams. Establishing the flowchart structure for information sharing throughout the various networks. Translation of all online forms that should be happening. So all of that can be happening before we're even releasing any information. So I just wanted to bring us back on track in regards to the things that we have said need to be happening right now.
Thanks for that recap, Shanna. That's great. So I think what I'd like for us to spend the rest of our time on is thinking about, I think what Helen said, August 7th is sort of our working backwards, and then what do we need to do after August 7th, right? So there's the before everything sort of like hits the fan, and then after that, what is it that we need to be doing beyond that? And so, because I think the after August 7th is sort of going to be damage control time, and especially after a decision is made of how we're going to open schools. And so, I think we sort of need to look at it in two different aspects, but that's just my thinking. Agreed. I see a lot of head nodding, but so it seems like a lot of the pieces that Shanna just mentioned, they're sort of like that pre-work. And then what do we, so I think that sort of like we can create a timeline before August 7th for all those pieces, but then after August 7th, that's the piece that we sort of have a little up in the air because we don't know when that information is going to come out. So I think the question is, in an ideal world, if we had information by X date, when would that be so that way we can communicate effectively? That's the big question on the table.
You have to
But
be. I mean, it seems like John said, it seems like we are going to be on that crisis kind of delivering information because families want to know since the deadline is so close, right, to the opening of schools. We have to have systems where you can get translations right away so you can send information, but you cannot wait more than 24 hours to get that information out because by that time, the media has it, the neighborhood person who have halfway sort of information is putting it out there. It's all social media, and then you have to go back to redo the information and clear out the air about what is actually accurate and what is not. But that's my.
So Shanna, if you go through your list, can we assign who should be doing that? Because it sounds like as you were reading your list, some of that can be started today and needs to be assigned to someone to make sure it gets done. Like the main thing I'm thinking of is you just talked about translation of even the current documents such as registration. Okay, who do we get to do that? How can we get that moving?
Yeah, I just included in chat just so everybody can visually look at the key decisions there that I mentioned, sharing the survey results back, planning community, and on. So we can look at that and maybe think about who can do what.
Just in terms of sharing, so that's already on our plan, and we work with on Tuesday, and we will immediately translate those and turn those around, and they will start our communication chain. That's why we need how are we going to communicate so that everyone's clear. And that will start on Wednesday in Insider Express. So those will go in on Insider Express. Our FAQs that we've got so far, we collect a lot of, so any questions you get, you should share with me and we can add them to our FAQ document. We have an ongoing FAQ document for opening, also for summer school, various different topics. We open a new document on that. And then I think we also had it scheduled for a webinar from the superintendent answering questions this Tuesday, ready for on the reopening planning, ready to share on Wednesday for our weekly cycle schedule. So just kind of going, where that's already planned out and what we already have down, Shanna, in terms of those deliverables.
Helen, you were jumbled the very first thing that you said. So can you say what is going out on Wednesday? Is that what was being translated currently? And
sorry, okay, I'm having connection. Oh, hang on.
I have a question. I have a question for Helen too. How many families do we have that are subscribed and are reading the Insider and the Express as it goes out? I think that is important to know, because if we are putting all our effort in a document that it is 7 pages long, but families are not reading it, is that effective? Should we actually shift and be more grassroots, pushing from different ways and schools the information, increasing it?
Express Insider are a foundational document for the information that needs to go out and needs to be shared for that week. They are not the be all and end all. We never make them the be all and end all. They are the foundation for the communications that needs to go out. And during a crisis communication always starts centrally, and then it's disseminated, like Priyan said, through the schools, through FACE. People take that information and share it out rather than creating your own. When we start creating our own in schools, and then we have the, then it ends up being messy. So the Express Insider are the foundational documents. They are nothing more than that. After that, we then, and we have on Express, we have with 55 to 59% on average open rate for that document every time we send it out. When we've been sending it out more regularly, it's been around that. And it's gone up obviously through the crisis, and it's remained at that higher level than normal. It's not everyone. We send out to roughly 20,000 people Express. Remember, we have 16,000 enrollees in our student enrollees. And then and that's around 9,000, 10,000 families in total. So we're getting to, a large percentage of them. It's not everyone. And then off the back of that, then gets translated and it gets sent out as a text message in multiple languages. We have data on who opens those, who clicks on various links of those. According to, and I have to share that I can't remember the percentages offhand. It varies according to the topic as to how well read or opened it is. If we've got a critical moment, we find that our Arabic, Amharic, and Spanish text messages are opened at a very, very, very high percentage rate. When it's like not so pertinent, people don't feel the urgency, they don't open them nearly so much. So we're really seeing a great disparity there, whereas we don't see that in the English language one that goes out. That is pretty consistent in terms of open rates.
So what's going on Wednesday?
Wednesday content, sorry, I know I'm having difficulty with like my internet connection today. How we're going to communicate that flow chart, if we can, internally to Insider, externally to Express, those will be very different charts.
Okay.
How we, and then our survey results, which were already scheduled. The FAQ update on for 4.0 planning, what we have so far, verbal, you can listen to them, you don't have to read them or go to that link. And then the following week, Wednesday 22nd is the only other time we have something like particularly detailed, like that's already on our list, and that is the board update, and we will share that board update with, in terms of what our an update on what our cross-functional planning teams are doing is what we have promised our community on Wednesday 22nd.
Okay, so we have about 9 minutes left, and so do you feel like we have enough to populate our key decisions chart? Or I know we've been talking. People have been putting things in the chat. I see that Shanna has sort of put everything in the chat for key decisions. And I know that Kurt's been sort of adding it to the workbook, but what do you all feel? I almost feel like one of the things that would be helpful is for us to sort of, and we don't have to do this now, is looking through before our next call and sort of who we have to sort of establish ownership of these things. Who's going to take on which piece? And so you could either say, I'll take that on, or suggest who should take it on, or it should be several people, or, you know, I think most of these things are going to be sort of team efforts. But I think we definitely need to start establishing who's going to start taking on what pieces.
Who's responsible for the forms? Can we talk about like what department needs to, is that communications, or is it the responsibility of individual departments that put them out? Like, who does the forms online? Can we establish moving that forward?
So what forms are you
the responsibility? Sorry, at the moment that's the responsibility of each department. So for example, if we have registration forms, that comes through Mariah and IT, and the registration forms are different from others because we can put the Spanish online, those are translated, those are up online in Spanish. We can't do Arabic and Amharic online, we just don't have the tools and equipment to actually post that online. We have Chromebook would be, again, fall under IT, and we remind them that they need to be doing it and sending them, and we assist with it when it's not done or when it is. We do our best, I think, is our message. Sometimes it's finding out that something hasn't been completely completed before when we're posting it, you know, and then we're days behind.
So what do we do to get technology? Because none of those forms that I've seen are translated in any language other than English. So what would be the next step for us to get that done?
So if you're noticing that they're not done, you send a note to Elizabeth, John Kreitz, whoever's responsible for those forms. If it's registration forms, that's a different issue. That's PowerSchool limitations, like Lane just said in the chat just now. But any other forms, they should be translating anyway. That's just part of our division commitment to accessibility, and it's in a policy that everyone translates. So we need to all be making sure that we are doing that work. It doesn't fall to patients. Remember, translation doesn't even live within our team. So, you know, we basically use translation like anyone else does when we need them as a service. And I think we need to just keep reminding our other departments and other team members that is the way that they need to operate too.
So I can send it.
Oh, I was going to say, I can develop a list of what I know and I was going to send it to Kurt, maybe from you to Elizabeth, may have a little more pool of the forms, and then maybe copying EL with it as well. I just wanted to kind of raise those things up the ladder. But as far as registration with summer school, if I recall correctly, when I was going in to try to sign my daughter up for the different additional options, I don't think any of that was in anything other than English.
On the website? Okay.
So like that was unfortunate for any family.
Ready? There were a
What would you like
lot
on
of
it?
adjustments made to that
Without butter or
afterwards.
anything?
I
I don't know if you're gonna like this bread if it's just plain.
Somebody's on, not on mute, and we.
Oh, sorry, that's me.
Yeah, but that's not me asking for butter.
Okay. So I think we have 5
Sorry, I'm trying to
minutes
feed my
left.
father.
We have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna make sure that we are set for our next meeting. I think what I suggested was that we go into the document. I don't know if we should probably create just a column that says ownership or owners. And you can nominate yourself or nominate others that you think are suggestions. I think we need to sort of think about. And again, I'm saying this because I need your help, because I don't know exactly who should be owning what. So I definitely need your help with this. Otherwise, I'd be doing it myself and saying, "What do you think? What do you think?" The other piece of it is thinking a little through more about this timeline and how we're gonna put that together based on the information that we talked about today. So I think we need to come to that, making sure that the key decisions we talked about today are in the document in the workbook. And then in terms of what's the actual timeline look like, and then who owns it. So those are the key things for next week. I want to sort of do a check out. How are people feeling? Concerned, so we feel a little more at ease based on this conversation, where we were from the beginning. Thoughts, reactions. So we have about 4 minutes left.
I just have a quick question for Helen or for everybody. Could on Wednesday, the 22nd, you said are the board updates on reopening? Can we get from the Health and Safety Committee a statement or something to add about our health and safety? Can we put that in on Wednesday the 22nd? Because August 7th is when the big stuff is coming out. Do you think the team could give us something for the 22nd for
I think we're going
why
to need
we're
it.
making decisions?
Yeah, Brianne, I missed off telling you something else actually. I was just going back through our list and looking for our editorial list of what else needs to go out on that day. And I also think that is the day when we have to share our request for a commitment to return, both for staff and for families, because otherwise you've got to give them a week to get that out. Is that a right timeline, Julia? And I'm just thinking that in sync with that, you'll also need a statement around health and safety.
Right. I think the thing is that we really, if I'm not mistaken, we're not really having to reinvent the wheel too much here, because for each of the special board meetings that are taking place, there are going to be updates about health and safety, communications, all the pieces that Dr. Hutchings will be communicating. So I think a lot of that information that's shared publicly during the school board meeting is information that we can use to share publicly about all the health and safety measures. I think what John was talking about was more along the lines of the specifics around how we're going to handle those nuances when they come up. A child gets sick. A child just, went to Florida for the weekend and came back, and now they're around all their little friends in school. And the cases are soaring. Like, people are going to get nervous, and we're going to hear from parents and say, did you know that Johnny was in Florida this weekend? All those wonderful little things that are going to come up. I think that's what you're talking about, John, right? Like those things, how do we?
Yeah, that's right. And it even happened, and it happened in, TC, the rumors at TC the week before we closed down were rampant about students who had been a member, who'd attended that Episcopal church in Georgetown, right?
Yeah,
and
everybody had that. The vicar.
And that's gonna, and you saw that the week before anybody was really sophisticated yet about sort of what was going on. And I just think that right now that there's a threshold question for, not for every family, everybody's in a different place, but for many families, there's this threshold question that to get to the point of answering, what am I going to do with my child this fall? And it's true for faculty too, for faculty to come back and say, where do I want to be in the fall? What are you going to do to protect me? And if you tell me what you're going to do to protect me, then I can make that decision. But I can't make that decision if I don't know how I'm going to be protected. So I think that health and safety question is going to be critical. I put in the comments, I mean, they're not the only questions, or they're not perfectly worded. I put in the comments a series of questions that could at least give you the kind of an idea of the kind of questions that I think people are in people's minds, both parents, other parents I talk to, and faculty that I talk to. And I think that those are the kinds of, like, if I walk in the door, what's going to happen? Who's going to protect me? I mean, this question about 3 to 6 feet is, I mean, when that comes out today, everybody's been in a different frame, and it's going to take folks a week or two to get comfortable with that notion. As a teacher, right, I was imagining 11 kids in my classroom. 3 feet, if it's 3 feet, maybe that means I've got a full classroom, and that's going to make teachers feel really, really different than having 11, right? If you're talking about 50% versus a full classroom of 25. And so teachers have really got to be, have got to be comfortable. Families have really got, we're running a summer camp. You may have heard in the background. We're running a summer camp right here in the front yard. Louisa's camp is running, and it's been, we're in week number 2, and the communications that we had with families before she decided to do that to our art camp this summer, there was a lot of communication. People want to know what you're going to do and how you're going to be protected. And if that's not clearly communicated, none of the rest of this will work.
So it's 11:01, and I want to be conscious of everyone's time. But Krishna has had her hand raised for a while, so I'll give her the last word, unless she feels that everything's been addressed.
Everything has been addressed. Thank you, John.
Okay. So thank you all for participating today. I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think if we come prepared next week to really start building that timeline, if you have suggestions, I will meet with the rest of the chairs tomorrow. If you have suggestions about making the process better, certainly send me an email so I can communicate that. I think we've all, like I said, who feels a little bit better after the call? Hopefully everybody. Maybe? No? Some? A little bit? Okay, good. And so we'll reconvene next week, and it doesn't mean we can't talk before then if you have things that you want to share, and we'll continue to work on the document for next week. Shanna?
Want notes shared out? Do you want them just attached and emailed out, or do we have a shared Google Drive that these should be posted to? Does it matter?
For notes,
add them to the bottom of the communication plan. Let's use that for our note taking. So then we have the notes aligned with the actions that we're then meant to be taking or we've agreed to take. I think that, can I drop a section? I'll reshare that with everyone on this call.
Okay, and then Shanna, you can create a notes section and you can put that in there.
I'm sorry, create it where, on Google Drive?
No, in the no, Shanna, in the document we already have. I'm trying to get back onto the image. So I already have a communication plan that we set up right at the very beginning. I'm going to make sure that everyone's on that, and I will add a title at the bottom for notes from planning team meeting. Is that okay? I think it's better to have it all in one place, so then we're basically, seeing what our notes were and then making sure they get included in the plan.
So you're going to share that with all of us, and then I can drop it
right
in.
now.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just adjusting our deliverables in there, and I'm going to reshare with everybody.
Is it a Google Doc?
Yes, it is.
It's a Google Doc.
So I'm gonna end the meeting because we're 4 minutes out, and I know other people have other things to do. And so thank you very much again.
Thanks.
If you have questions, let me know. And I'm gonna stay on with Simba for a second because I have to figure something out. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.